like now to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Ronald Sultana from Malta. He's actually very well known in this career guidance community, and we are so honored that he's here with us today. I got to see him in 2017 in Prague at the conference, and his presentation was very I was captivated by his presentation. And he's a professor of educational psychology and comparative education at the University of Malta, where he directs the Euro-Mediterranean Center for Educational Research. He's author and editor of 35 volumes and more than 120 articles in journals and books. And much of his work relates to the linkages between education and work, including career guidance and educational development. So I would like now to Ronald to tune in or turn on your microphone and camera, and maybe introduce yourself. Tell us something more about you, about your background, and what are you going to share with us today.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Ladislav. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, sure. Everything's
very
perfect.
Good. Okay. So good morning, everybody. I hope you are in good health and your families also. These are difficult times. We all cope the best we can. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some thoughts with you. Some of you have already met with me, and I've met with you, and we've learned from each other. And I hope that this online session will be productive for you, helpful and stimulating. I will be talking about the client voice in service design and delivery. That is the extent to which our clients who come for a service should be involved or not in both designing and delivering the kinds of services that they are in need of. And actually, I will be problematizing the notion of voice by asking the question that I'd like you to also consider, perhaps using the poll facility that is provided to you by the organizers, whether this notion of the clients, the citizens, the users being involved in designing and delivering a service, if not actually owning it, is a progressive idea, or is it problematic? Progressive in the sense that it's democratic, enabling, empowering, or is it perhaps problematic in the sense that it opens a whole host of issues that need to be considered before we can decide that giving or the clients taking voice, taking ownership of the service is a positive thing. So that's your question. Is client voice, the involvement of clients in the design and delivery of service a progressive thing, or is it potentially problematic? So I'll just give you a few seconds to...
You can go to, participants, you can go to the Slido, and there is a poll which is now active, and you can respond to this question. Do you think that the involvement of clients in service design is progressive or problematic? And Ronald, you can talk through, or well, explain further the question, or you can even start your presentation if you want.
I will do that. So the presentation tries to answer this question, and then we'll compare what your thoughts are. Although the poll doesn't give you the possibility of expanding and discussing, there's a whole conversation to be had about this, but I will try to explore with you some ideas that could be helpful in thinking this through. So the whole conference is around this keyword voice, and you are hearing my voice, and some of you know me. They know, or you know, that I've been involved in career guidance for a long number of years now, and especially over the last 20 odd years, I've been greatly involved in career guidance at a European level, but also beyond Europe, especially in the Arab states, which have been incredibly has been an incredibly powerful experience for me, learning about different contexts and what career guidance might mean in places like Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Palestine, Israel, and so on and so forth. I've also been very lucky in having gone all over Europe thanks to various projects, often organized through the European Commission. And my voice, what you're hearing here, is actually a very rich voice. Rich in the sense that it's not only the voice of somebody located in Malta, which is just here, a little tiny island, quite peripheral to Europe, in the middle of the Mediterranean. That is an important voice because I am who I am. My voice reflects my upbringing, my country, even the geography of our land, the values that we cherish, the problems that we have that have been made quite well known internationally over the last years. So it's a voice which is rich because I am based in Malta, but also because of the international experiences I have been extremely privileged to have. And I'm going to share some of that. And so here is my voice. Here's who I am. I come from Malta. I actually live, I don't know if you can see the cursor. I actually live somewhere here, overlooking our beautiful Grand Harbor. It's a voice that has been shaped by a lot of experiences in my own country. It is shaped by my family. And here are my 2 grandchildren, who I spend quite a lot of time with and enjoy tremendously. It has been shaped by my participation as a member and as a contributor to the European Lifelong Guidance Policy Network, ELGPN. That's in a way my other family, who have shared, we have shared between ourselves so much and learned from each other. It's also, you know, a voice that has been shaped by diversity, by being catapulted, pushed into situations where cultures are different, languages are different, values are different. And I think my presentation today will therefore try to highlight the extent to which our voice is multiple. It's not a single voice. There is this notion from Kant, from the philosopher Kant, that our voice reflects who we are, deeply who we are. While what I'm going to try to suggest is a different approach, which is that voice is tricky. Voice is multiple. Voice can be heard, but there must be somebody who listens. And voice is not particularly reflective of who I am, but as the beautiful phrase from South Africa, I believe from the Zulus, who say they have a philosophy called Ubuntu, which says, I am because you are. So the whole notion of voice, that we have clients or citizens or users who are somehow, you know, able instinctively to articulate what they and their group, whether they are a group of persons with disability or women, or as I've seen in some countries like Luxembourg, for example, the users that organized the career guidance service for themselves were victims of domestic violence. An incredibly powerful and important voice. But what can we look into that voice in order to see the layers of power that are at play, rather than simply accept that this is, you know, progressive? And I'd like to perhaps illustrate in a more pragmatic way what I mean by dragging up a story from my past. When I was doing my PhD on career education and career guidance in New Zealand. So it's a long way away and a long time ago, but it's a story that has remained with me because, and I will use it today, because it helps articulate and illustrate some of the points, some of the more abstract points I'd like to make. So in this picture here, it's a very important picture for me. I am here with a lady whose name is Tuti Magna, who I was teaching in a university context as a teacher assistant while doing my PhD. I was teaching about counseling and career guidance and career counseling. And this Tuti Magna okay, who is the center of my story, really. She, during the group dynamics and during the interactive sessions, was doing all the wrong things. She was joking when she shouldn't be. She was keeping silent when she was expected to talk. She was talking when she was expected to be silent. And in my head, bad teacher that I am, I concluded that this Tuti wasn't particularly bright. She is a Maori lady that is one of the, she's a member of the indigenous groups in New Zealand that were there before the whites, before the Pākehā. She is very much embedded in her culture, which is different from that of the whites. And as you can see, she's a lovely lady, lots of smiles, lots of hugs. But I was saying, I wonder whether she'll get her master's. I don't think she has what it takes. So one day, this Tuti told me, Ronald, would you like to come with me to my village? It's far down south in the North Island. And I said, of course, I'd love to. So I went into her car, went down this trip, which took us at least 8 hours to get to her village, which is on the coast. It's called Mokau. And as we were passing by all these bends in rivers, all these mountains, all these hills, all these fields, she kept talking about the stories that came through from her culture. The Tanifas, the spirits that guarded the forests and the rivers, the battles that the Maori had fought and won and lost, the ancestors that she respects. And this was like, you know, being exposed to a treasure trove of local culture, which you could not really get from books, but from somebody who was really part and parcel of that culture, until we arrived in her village. Now, the Maoris have a communal hut, which they call a marae, where they have carvings of their ancestors, and they meet and they discuss and talk and sing and laugh and cry and pray and so on and so forth. And she invited me in, which was a huge privilege. And I did all the wrong things. I sat down in front of a sculpture in wood of a Maori ancestor, and they told me, he's the chief. I mean, that is not for you. You sit at the side. And I did that. But Tuti stood up in front of her community and started talking in her language, switching to English for my sake from time to time. And this lady, whose voice had been so subdued, had been so submerged when she was in the context of the university, which is surrounded by whites, surrounded by people who had overpowered her own people, this lady who had appeared to be, you know, doing all the wrong things, in front of her community, stood tall and proud, spoke with passion and with so much intelligence and wisdom. Everybody was laughing, sometimes crying because of her oratory, her rhetorical skills. And there was such a beautiful feeling within that marae, within that community hut where there were the people from the village that she belongs to. And after they clapped because I was there, they, you know, welcomed me. After the session, she took me to her home and I told her, Tuti, I have something to tell you. I have to apologize to you because when you were at university, I thought that you do not have what it takes. And now I've seen you here and I've seen another voice, another you. And she looked at me with her mischievous smile and she told me, why the f do you think I invited you here? She wanted to see me. She wanted me to see her in a different context, in a different role. That there are many layers of voices, some of which are silenced by context and some of which emerge because the context is suitable. So in these first couple of slides, I have already given you my speech. In a sense, all the other slides, and there are some other slides, I'm actually going to take this story and unpack it and do with it something which is a bit more, let's say, academic and abstract. But if you remember this story, you will remember the main points of what I'd like to share with you. And the key questions we are asking when we talk about client voice, we have to ask questions like, whose voice are you actually hearing? When I heard Tutti at university, whose voice? I was hearing a colonized voice, a voice that is afraid of being in that context, afraid of facing up a white male academic who knows all the tricky words, who knows how to speak in such a way that she feels inferior, and therefore she feels lost and not able to voice herself. Do I have just one voice? The Ronald that you are hearing here as the academic, the speaker, the person who has been around, the one who has, give so many talks here and there. Do I have just one voice? What about the voice that my wife hears, my grandkids hear, my children hear, my students hear? I am multiple. I have multiple voices. So when we say client voice, what are we referring to? Can I actually speak? I mean, you've given me this privilege, which is an almost obscene privilege, of speaking for 3/4 of an hour without being interrupted. Nowhere else in life are we given this privilege. So when I speak, can I speak? Some people don't have this opportunity, space, privilege, and time. Who and what speaks through me is what you're hearing when you hear a client. Are we hearing the voice, the essential voice of an essential individual? Or are there so many things, history, culture, experience, speaking through that person? For example, the fact that I'm white, or so they say, kind of more brownish than white, I guess, being from the Mediterranean, but certainly belonging to an ethnic group that feels privileged, white privilege. The fact that I'm male, for example, despite the fact that I try to combat my macho upbringing sometimes. My wife reminds me constantly, you're saying that because you're male. And I realize that this maleness that I've been socialized into keeps coming up. So what speaks through me? Which echoes are there in my voice? Is my voice too loud? As an academic, for example, where I can play the part of the expert, that gives my voice a certain loudness. And that loudness has the potential of silencing other voices, which have different stories to tell. So my presentation to you, my friends, is precisely to problematize this notion of voice, not in order to dismiss it, but to make sure that when we approach the concept of user voice in the design and delivery of service, we actually know what we're talking about in some profundity, with some sophistication, because very often the whole notion of voice is problematic.
Thank you,
Now,
Ronald.
my voice is a particular voice.
May I interrupt, Ronald?
Sure,
because
please.
we just want to go back to the poll to announce results, and you can reflect those results and then pick it up from there. I think you will see it shortly on your screens. We ask, do you think that the involvement of clients in service design is progressive or problematic? 86% voted for progressive, only 14 opted for problematic. So there is this question, isn't it obvious that clients should have a say in a service design and delivery?
Right. That's very interesting. And that's what I was expecting in some ways, that obviously client voice seems to be something progressive. Now, I will be arguing that it is a progressive element in what we would like to do, but it's also problematic. So it's not an either or. I think it is progressive, but it is also problematic. And I will be making this argument and hope that by the end of the session, if we had to have another poll, you would still be with me and perhaps being more sensitive to the problematic nature of voice. What I will be discussing with you is very political. As an academic and as a sociologist in particular, my task is to basically take things which we normally in everyday life take for granted and try to untangle them, Try to show the complexity behind them, behind the words that we use. Hold up a mirror to society. Of course, doing so implies that I'm taking a position. Why is my position legitimate compared to yours? Am I claiming that my mirror, the mirror I'm holding up, is not distorted? No, far from it. I'm saying that all of us, whether we know it or not, hold a worldview. We look at the world in particular ways. We have an ideology, we have a political orientation. And what I'm suggesting is that it is extremely dangerous not to acknowledge that you and I are political. We are political in everything we do, in the words that we choose, in the action that we decide to pursue, in the systems that we either design or participate in. Everything is political, and by political I mean we are greatly involved in issues of power, in influencing, in distributing scarce resources in particular ways to specific groups. So what I'm saying, you will take, I'm sure, with a pinch of salt. You will try to see how my value system is similar to yours or different, and you will make your own choices and decisions as to how to be ethical, professional practitioners, system managers, and service deliverers. So that's an important issue that we have to consider, and that at the end of the day, in my own personal life, when I consider my own value system and my own ideology, I often ask the question, even though I might be wrong, I will keep trying. And the best thing for me is to do the most good and the least harm possible to the greatest number of people. So that is what drives me. Now, in a sense, isn't it common sense? Isn't it common sense that users should be involved? I mean, we've grown up in a society where we travel when we can, no thanks to the pandemic now, but we go to restaurants, we use services, we use Airbnbs, we go to hotels, we use pubs, and we have grown up. Even if we go to a public lavatory, for example, in an airport, we are asked to give feedback, either by pressing, the smileys, or by putting a like on Facebook, or by writing a review. This review says, I've been here to this pub 2 or 3 times. The beer is just okay. I will not be coming back. My money will be spent at breweries in SAC with better views and better beer. And you read that and you say, okay, I won't go there. So isn't it normal? Why are we making such a big fuss about client voice? They even now give ratings to professors. They say whether I'm a good professor or a bad professor. And there are polls, and these are public. Very interesting. There's ways of getting client views through what is called the mystery shopper. They send a person who is a client, but you are not aware that he or she is a mystery shopper, so that they use the public employment services, your guidance office, in a kind of under the pretense of being a true client, but that client is actually checking what kind of service you give. Very much like in the, checking out restaurants, that somebody goes, he's from or she's from the Michelin Guide, and they taste the food and then they write a review, but you as the waiter and the restaurateur are not even aware. They're good. And we also have, obviously, the very powerful agenda that has been promoted by groups like persons with disability, who, when they come together as a political voice, say to us, nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. You cannot design a service for us. You cannot give us a voice. We will have our own voice. So you will do nothing about us without us. And this is also true for other groups, for indigenous groups, for ethnic minority groups, for example. Maoris in New Zealand refuse the idea that whites actually do research about them. They say that Maoris have to have the right the exclusive right of researching their own interests and promoting their own voice. They're taking over. They think that there's nothing worse than whites doing research on them, or even trying to say, we know best for what's best for you. We're going to give you this service.
Ronald, can you, yeah, I will just, can I ask you to maybe share with us your key messages for today?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. So the idea is that those who provide services need to be in tune with clients. That's one possibility. Or that the clients actually take control over the service. And what I'd like to say for the rest of the session, and hopefully we'll manage, and if we don't manage, don't panic about this, don't worry, the slides will reach you through the organizers. But I have only 4 messages, and most of these have already been given through the story. I'm going to argue that contexts matter as to whether and how voice should be given or taken by clients. Words matter. The words that we use are very important. They are very political. They are like kind of cluster bombs that explode in our minds and have particular meanings in the way we look at the world. That models of public service matter, and that the tensions between the pluses and the minuses of client voice are important, that we have to live with those tensions. So these are the 4 main points. And what I'd like to do with you now is first look at this contexts matter. I'm going to very briefly just indicate to you, and then you can always kind of reflect, get back to me, read, that the whole notion of voice has changed historically from the 19th century onwards. We have the 1900s, science has become a very powerful voice in society. It is a powerful way of dealing with problems that have plagued humanity for millennia. And science, from the Industrial Revolution onwards, from even the 18th century onwards, one could say, with the rise of positivism, we see that science has the power to solve problems that ordinary people do not have. And therefore, this gives the scientist, often white men in white coats, such power and such a powerful voice. Jump forward some decades, and what we have is a different movement in society, where we see that instead of power to science, we have the emphasis about power to the citizens. That it is, the 68 generation, in particular in Europe, okay, and in the States, in the West, where there is a contestation of authority, of the authoritative voice, and saying we need to give power back to the citizens. Those in charge at the top of the hierarchy, whether they are scientists or bureaucrats, have too much power. We come to the 80s, major change, which we are still, being influenced by. We've got Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and the rise of neoliberalism, where the idea is not power to the citizens, to politicized citizens, to critical citizens, but power to the market. Let the market decide what kind of services could be offered. Let the market decide, let the clients decide where to go. They have the power of choice, and they go where they think they will get the best service. We have now hit a different kind of era. Some call it populism, which is very close to fascism at times, where we give the power to the populace. Not to the political citizens, but power to the populace through rhetoric, through emotional discourses, through fake news, if you wish. So we are, the notion of voice shifts and changes according to the main trends that we are living in society. Let's look a little bit in more detail at this. Power to science, where the scientist, the professional career guidance practitioner, we've always had career guidance. Okay, I've got texts that go back to the year 1000 in Persia, for example, where they have a whole almost encyclopedia of how to do career guidance. We think that career guidance started with Frank Parsons in the States. What started with Frank Parsons in the States is the science of career guidance, where a group claimed to have special esoteric knowledge, that they are professional elites who have the knowledge to guide others, with the citizens being presented, portrayed as having deficits, not enough information, not knowing themselves enough, not this and that, and they are dependent on the professional, who again wears white, or you have to make an appointment to see him or her, who has to pass exams, who claims a special status, and who says, my voice is the one that matters. We know what's best for you. We know best for what is good for you. Okay, so that's the 1900s. We look at the 1960s, we see a radical change, a very important change, which almost brought down the French government of de Gaulle in France, where because of a number of factors, including more people being educated, formally educated, this access to knowledge made them realize that they too have a voice. They too can have a voice, and they rejected authority demanding participation at all levels, whether it's in school councils. It's no longer the head on himself or herself that leads. At university, with student participation at Senate, in all sorts of camps, in local councils. The idea was citizens should have a voice. The notion of subsidiarity, which is dear to the European Union, as we all know, the citizen as being equal and with resources, not a deficit. We want to have a say as partners, was the cry in the 1960s. Very, very important shift in mentality. This was challenged again in the 80s with the rise of neoliberalism, where we see a very vicious attack on the state and its services, that, you know, this nanny state that takes care of citizens as if they were, you know, babies, from the cradle to the grave, all these services which cost money. There's a whole apparatchik, a bureaucracy that manages, that has an overwhelming voice. So let's introduce market principles in the public service. A major, major change, where these services behave as if they were private enterprises, where they compete and where the citizen has so-called choice. With the citizen becoming not a citizen with a political citizen, but very much like a person who goes to this supermarket rather than the next one, listens to this radio station rather than the next one. The citizen is now a consumer, because within the neoliberal discourse, the idea is you know best what is good for you. And there is an attack on public services and an idealization of the consumer who chooses through voucher systems, for example, his or her own school for the kids and this and that. So this is another big change, where voice is given a particular understanding, twist. More recently, we've seen the rise of more populist governments all over Europe, internationally, where there is a derision, a discourse of derision, of making fun of science and expert knowledge, where there is an appeal to emotional engagement with very complex issues, which are reduced very often to particular ideological sound bites. And the citizens are considered to be the common people and the leader of the nation, very much like a father, a patriarch that has the moral high ground, who decides who is telling the truth and not. But the voice that is given to the populace is very much steered not only by fake news, but by particular rhetorical devices that do not encourage analysis, but rather emotional following. This has been challenged now by the arrival of the COVID pandemic, where we see again the rise of the dignity of science as an important voice and expert knowledge as being able to save not only the economy, but lots of people. So these are the context that I would like, this is the story, the narrative that I'm trying to share with you. And it's a story that is important because each story uses its particular vocabulary. And what I'm going to argue now is extremely serious. It worries me to death. Why? Because since each of these kind of approaches has developed its own vocabulary, and this vocabulary becomes very popular, very much in use. Like, for example, let's take something linked to the pandemic, social distancing. And I used to use this word because everybody uses it until one psychologist, Ioannis Katsarov, perhaps you know him, very active in ECADOC and the NICE network. He told me, why are we using this word social distancing? It's physical distancing. The pandemic is physically distancing us. We can use other ways to remain socially close. But I used to use it without thinking. Why? It's everywhere. Words matter. That's my next point. The words we use create our perception of the world. Jacques Lacan, was a very well-known psychotherapist, somebody who wrote very interesting stuff about our psyches, wrote this very beautiful phrase: we live in a world of words that creates a world of things. The words we use become so real, so the sociological term is reified, that things out there reflect the words we have in our mind. Another way of putting this is that the words I speak become the house I live in. Beautiful phrase. The words I speak become the house I live in. And these four developments historically, over time, have created what we can call discursive ecologies. We all know what an ecology is. We live in an ecology. It's an ecology of words. And what is the ecology of words? We just take two of them, the last two, let's say the one of the market and the one of the citizens. If we are still captured by a neoliberal discursive ecology where everything is about the market, we will use very dangerous words like decentralization, stakeholders, partnership agreements, accountability, efficiency, managerialism. There's a whole host of words that come through, for example, from the World Bank, unfortunately also from the European Commissions, which since Barroso took a very neoliberal turn, not at all close to the social democracy model that many of us are in love with. While if we look at the other discursive ecology, perhaps best represented by people like Paulo Freire, for example, the Brazilian educator, and others like him, we find other types of words being used: collegial, dialogic, community, praxis, cooperation, equity, authenticity, conscientization, making people aware, helping people become empowered by understanding how to read not just words, but the world. And we are like a fish. Like a fish.
Ronald, may I interrupt for a second, because you raised so many interesting questions, and I'm sure also participants are really captivated by that. So again, I would like to encourage you to go to Slido and ask Ronald questions. After his presentation is done, we will come back to this question and I will pose it to him. And as I said, you raised so many interesting questions, and if I understand you well, words and notions are always part of sort of wider discourse, and that discourse shapes how we think of client voice. And can you elaborate on that further, and also going to your next point and models of public service, how we can adopt them and have real effect on how we think of client voice, and also what kind of models are you in favor of?
Yes, thank you very much for those questions, because they help us move along and kind of address some of the finer points in this session. I've put a goldfish there to remind us that we are a bit like goldfish, like fish, swimming in water, not realizing that we are swimming in this water until somebody grabs us and puts us outside of it and we start gasping for air. That is what I'm trying to do here, is precisely this notion of conscientization. That is, raise more awareness. Many of you already have this awareness. In any case, I'm just expressing it in my own way, hopefully it's helpful way, to realize that the words, the discursive ecology, the discursive sea in which we swim is not innocent. It reveals, it vehicles, it brings with it a worldview. And what I'd like to do in answering Vladislav is to remind you, now this is a bit complex, we do not have the time to go into it, but the key message here is that a lot of the words that we are using in career guidance, which in some fora we have been challenging, for example, through the ELGPN at times. I've seen Helia, hello Helia, you are with us from Portugal. We've discussed this so many times. It's coming through, for example, from the 2 volumes that my colleagues Tristram Hooley and Ria Thompson and I have put together, the 2 volumes on career guidance and social justice. What are we doing here? We are reminding ourselves and others that the words that we use are part of a structured way of dealing with public services, which started in the 80s with the rise of neoliberalism, with the articulation of neoliberalism based on such theories as those of Hayek in Austria and others, but made popular by people like Reagan and Thatcher and others, where the way we manage risk in society, because we live, as the pandemic reminds us, we live in risky societies, we live at risk, they developed a particular way of managing public services, which is called New Public Management, which by now has been criticized to bits. It's very important to keep this in mind, but things in the European Union and in our individual member states take time to change, to realize that New Public Management has a lot of difficulties. It is an approach to organizing public services in such a way that certain strategies become widespread, whether it's in education, whether it's in health, whether it's in care services, wherever. And this is the model that best describes, in my view, what many countries tried to do, increasing market incentives by giving money to private enterprises. Outsourcing is a very popular word, creating competition, top-down management through a number of ways, by inspection, by funding only those who reach certain standards and certain objectives, and so on and so forth, by direct intervention. But notice here how interesting this is. One of the aspects of New Public Management is to have the clients shape the service from below by giving them choice, by personalizing. We're going to hear about this later on today from Tamas, by funding that follows users' choices. If there is a school that lots of parents decide to send their kids to, then more money to that school. Other schools become sink schools, schools that who remains in them gets less and less and less, and engaging users' voice. So in a way, those of us who politically are progressive, are worried about neoliberalism, are concerned about what New Public Management does, about this excessive emphasis on accountability that destroys the joys of people who are in their place because of the constant harassment of forms and filling of, all these kinds of surveillance of your work, rather than building upon the sense of calling, of being of service to others. Then, if you are of a person who politically is inclined to be skeptical of New Public Management, worried about its effects on services, then we need to be very careful before we accept and adopt this notion of client voice, because unless we're careful, we find ourselves placed precisely in the discursive ecology and in the political ecology of neoliberalism, which, as we know from quite a lot of studies that I don't have the time to go into, but that could be the topic of another Euro guidance meeting on social justice, that career guidance framed within a neoliberal view does not promote social justice. It promotes rather more injustices. So Ladislav asked me a further question. So what actually are you after, Ronald? I mean, okay, so you've been critical, and academics are excellent at criticizing. They are terrible when it comes to providing some answers, and I'm also terrible at that. But if I could conclude my presentation very quickly, so that we have time for some discussion, if possible, is to say that one of the models that I value, which I think privileges client voice, is progressive in many ways, but is also aware of the difficulties, which I will try to explore. That if we agree that that not only professionals like yourselves, practitioners, have expert knowledge, but that academics have expert knowledge, that clients have expert knowledge of their own lives, that, you know, different groups in society have diverse expertise. If it's aimed at the same target, improving service, have the same goal, then we can talk perhaps a little bit about a partnership model where users work closely with NGOs who represent them, governments who have a role to play. Just think of the pandemic. Where would we be without the state? That is, under neoliberal governance, you have the individualization of risk. You are the master or the mistress of your own destiny. It is up to you. Develop your skills to survive. Be an entrepreneur of the self. Okay, what happens if the state does not intervene? If the state, an honest state, and we have to find honest states and honest politicians, when we have an honest state that really socializes the risk out there in society, that is, it makes sure that we are there as a part of the human race, watching out for the other, not only as national citizens, but even more beautiful as global citizens, okay? So we have universities that develop, have the privilege of time to study, reflect, research, and bring specialist knowledge. Practitioners like yourselves, who meet clients every day and who develop an insight into what it means to be, you know, a single mother looking for work, an ex-inmate in prison who's out looking for work, all right, or a person with disability. So all of us have something to contribute towards the same goal. So when we come to this partnership, which is one way of looking at social services, at public services, then we have to think, what kind of partnership? And there are different levels of partnership. This is an old article, which many people refer to. It goes back to 1969, but it's a useful model, which reminds us that the way we build up a partnership is a continuum from the least participation to the most participation. In a way, it's like a hierarchy. Let's say many of us inform our clients. We do our best to get information out there on websites, through beautiful leaflets. We sometimes consult. We organize user surveys. Did you like? Did you not like? What would you like us to do better? So as we go up, then we have a partnership where we sit around the table and design something together, a service together. We decide that we should take a step back and delegate and give citizens control. So this is, in a sense, a hierarchy of partnership, a continuum. What we have learned since this kind of model was proposed is it does not have to be a hierarchy. That is, not everywhere should we have full citizen control. For example, if you are in a school and you want to have your clients, your young citizens who are 8, 10, 12, 14 years old, is it reasonable to give them control over the service? Or is it perhaps more reasonable to have a partnership with them? So it really depends on context. So while this was initially presented as, you know, this is better bad, better, and best, we have to look at context, I would suggest, so that as our colleagues from Denmark and Norway, Peter Plant and Erik Haug, whose article I found extremely useful, remind us that we can have a kind of a taxonomy of involvement in education and vocational guidance. And very quickly, because time is our enemy, there are these levels of partnership. And perhaps you could ask, okay, what level are we operating with? What kind of voice am I giving to the client? Is it at this level where we ask users to tell us, what does it feel like to use our service? That's level, the first level, where it focuses on the individual. Both these levels, we share information, we gather information from them, and then we give them a service. Or do we give voice in a more powerful way where clients shape the service, improve aspects of it, help set priorities, identify gaps, address unmet needs? Or is it even, more strategic? The levels 4 and 5. Do actual partners plan, develop, review the services, shape them? Tell us which methods they'd like us to use. I was recently talking to a friend of mine who was with a careers counselor who started using psychodynamic methods with her. And she said, my goodness, at the age of 60, I have COVID. I'm thinking of dying. Please don't start taking me back to what my mother did, at what my father did. This is not helping me. I want something different. So she has a voice on the choice of method. On opening times, most people would love to have a service during the summer when we're on holiday. Do we give them that? Influencing the routines, the language that we use. Many of us, without wanting to show off how cultured and trained and professional we are, by using language that alienates and creates a distance between myself and my clients. Okay, so here we've opened up the whole notion of voice. What do we mean by voice? How much voice? Whose voice? Whose voices?
Ronald, I just wanted to ask that because you presented quite some conflicting perspectives, and it seems to me that you are telling us that there is some kind of tensions inherent to the use of the notion of client voice, and I would like for our participants to sort of visualize. So can you summarize for us some of the positive and potentially negative factors to keep in mind in this regard?
Thank you very much for that question, because it helps us now kind of have a look at when we're talking about voice. And I'm very careful. I'm not saying giving voice, because who am I to give voice? Who am I? There's something arrogant in this idea of giving voice, as if I know I have the power to give you voice. We are citizens. And some Swedish colleagues have even criticized me correctly, justly. They were right. Even citizen is problematic nowadays, because there are so many non-citizens in our borders who have rights as human beings. So citizen in itself is an exclusive term, not an inclusive term. So I don't know which one to use. I'm lost. Perhaps you have better ideas. As human beings, part of the human race, which is under threat in so many ways. When we promise user voice, when we say users have a voice, what are some of the good things that come out of this? And here are some of them that come to mind. I'm sure you, with your experience, with your own expertise, come up with more. They have insider knowledge. Who more than a person with disability knows what it feels like? I know what it feels like when I take off my glasses. I can't see a thing. I know. Okay, so that insider knowledge is an important story. I will argue it is not all the story that there is to tell, but it is a very important story, the insider story. Because our stories as users do matter. We are going through them with all the messiness of life. When users take care of themselves, they can be responsive to needs that might not be visible to others. It also enhances this notion of agency, that we are not weak, vulnerable, and dependent. We realize that we have been made weak, vulnerable, and dependent by the kind of society we live in, okay? I am not weak, vulnerable, and dependent because society thankfully, has given me glasses, spectacles, and I can, for me, my disability has gone most of the time. And therefore, that increases my sense of agency. It promotes group advocacy. Our societies, especially neoliberal societies, encourage individualization. If there's a problem, it's my fault. I have to get myself out of it. There's a lot of emphasis on the individual. And we have forgotten solidarity and groups and community. So by having users come together to take care of their needs, we can have more agency and more group advocacy. It mobilizes networks. It can create alternative values. I remember being in, was it in Czech Republic or it was Slovakia? We had a meeting. It was Jasmine Muhic, perhaps some of you know him. We were meeting Roma people and asking them if they had to organize a careers guidance service, how would it be? What would it be? Would it be different? And what came across is very strong alternative values. I have a son who's a scientist, but I have another son who is a farmer. At the moment, he's in France, raising cabbages. He has masters, he's a trained teacher, but his approach to work is very different to mine and to my elder son. Beautiful alternative values, very ecological, self-sufficiency, and so on and so forth. So when we work with clients, we might be more respectful of the alternative values. We challenge the givens of our systems, of our theories. Users can generate their own knowledge, particularly through such ways as participant action research, for example, that instead of depending on academics to give them knowledge, they ask academics for support so that they create their own knowledge. Fantastic idea. And they can hopefully target funding where needed. Just quickly to conclude, those are some of the promises. What makes client voice potentially progressive? But there are pitfalls as well with user voice, as I've already mentioned several times. Clients, citizens, might be very happy with mediocrity because they don't know better. This is where professionals come in. They can point that what the service that their kids are getting, that the persons with disability are getting, are not up to standard, given what we know about the field. We have to do away with romantic notions of client voice, of citizen voice, as if citizens are innocent. Wherever you go, and there are more than one person present, power is at play. Power is at play. Think of schools where there are parents involved as partners in schools. You will find that very soon, parents with more education, parents who are more extrovert, parents who are often upper middle class, parents who are articulate and who know how to play the system, start becoming more powerful. And I've been to schools in Malta where we have strong parental involvement. But when I speak to other parents, they say, those group of parents have taken over. Power can still be at play. We have to be careful not to romanticize. It also essentializes group identity. That is, it makes the group of disabled persons only seen visible as if they were persons with disability, not their whole range of potential. We have to be very careful that it individualizes risk. It tends to say, well, you are the persons with disability, here's some money, find your way out of this. And it responsibilizes these groups to the point that if they don't succeed, they only have themselves to blame. And the government will say, we've individualized the risk, it's up to you. If you fail, we've given you voice. Is the voice given or claimed? Do I tell you you have voice, or do you tell me I want to have my own space and we determine the kinds of services that we want? It's very easy for governments, and I see this all around me, wherever I go, that governments and powerful groups give citizens a voice, but as a token, as a form of tokenism, to legitimize what they already want to do. So they have an agenda, but by giving voice to the citizen, they say, well, this has happened because the citizens wanted it, and they co-opt them in so many ways. We don't have the time to go into the politics, the political strategies about that. Well, I might have voice, but who listens is the question to ask as well. When I speak, who listens? Is there somebody listening out there? Does the group end up self-centered, looking only after itself, or does it have the common good, which is the whole point of a public service? The public service, under new public management and new managerialism and neoliberalism, has been so derided, made fun of, that we forget why public services were created. It is to take care of group interest, but not at the expense of the common good. And very often, if the power resides solely in a citizen group, one particular citizen group, there is the danger that the common good is forgotten. That's why I'm much more in favor of partnerships in the way I've described. And also, when you have citizens working on their own, they do not benefit very often unless they make a point of it, to benefit from broader knowledge that comes through from studies that have been carried out, research that has been carried out, which is why in my partnership model, academics also and researchers have a place. So I thank you very much for this incredible opportunity to speak to you all over Europe from my little office here in Malta. There is an encouragement here to think more deeply about these things. You have three references there. One of them is to my website. The second one is to some of my writings, which I distribute free with great pleasure. If you find anything there that is of value to you, please use. And my email in case you need to contact me for further discussion. So thank you very much, Ladislav. Thank you very much, Euro Guidance. And I hope this has been of value to you so that our voice is not just an echo, but a strong voice in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation and for putting the whole topic, voice of client in care guidance, into wider perspective. I can talk for myself that I thoroughly enjoyed your voice. There is no auditorium here to clap you, but I'm sure if there was any, you will be getting a huge applause right now. And thank you also for summarizing all the pitfalls and all the promises of this. And we actually have a bunch of questions from our participants, which I'd like shared with you, and also ask you those questions. And this is also opportunity for the rest of you to ask questions to Ronald. I'm sure he raised so many issues and questions which need further explanation. We have first questions. Maybe there are some deviance with that, meaning the topic in question. As in marketing strategies, listening to the client is a declaration that don't really produce or translate itself into actions. Can you maybe talk about this? I think it means that the voice of client is more like ideological concept rather than something that translates itself into real life, real practice, real care guidance and counseling.
Right. Thank you very much for your encouraging words. You know, when you speak into a computer, you end up feeling that you're speaking to yourself. So we have absolutely no clue what's happening out there. That's why I love speaking in public, because I'm always terrified, but I also love it because I can see reactions and the reactions feedback, and you know that you're connecting, and you know, you feel part of the human race in that way. So thank you also for your encouraging words and for the question. And I think that we're going to see throughout this conference, some people presenting the way that client voice is actually implemented, operationalized, made real, not just remain, you know, a slogan. I do remember in the work we did, you know, the travels across Europe during the surveys we did for the European Commission, both on public services with my mentor, Tony Watts, who is now retired and who I've learned so much from, a wonderful man. And also, you know, through the ELGPN, we did see some really, really good examples of people, citizens coming together in order to voice their concerns. in all sorts of ways. Sometimes they were given space, but sometimes they claimed the space for themselves. One of them, for example, is precisely in Luxembourg. I was so impressed by a group of women who were victims of domestic violence, who wanted to make their voice heard, who wanted to show what they're going through, that they shared their experiences in a way that enabled them and empowered them, to come together and to make strong recommendations as to how they could be served and how they could actually serve themselves. And there are many other examples. For example, I'm thinking of career guidance in Denmark, which is offered to workers via trade unions. You have care guidance stewards within workplaces. So human beings are very creative, and we need to hear these wonderful stories of initiative where the voice of the citizen is not a tokenism. It's not something that is used for manipulative purposes, but is actually, in a democracy, becomes an informed voice, a voice that is aware of the issues, and can therefore bring forth more democratic and more effective ways of servicing our needs in a society that is full of risks, and that we can mobilize solidarity in ways that makes lives for people a bit easier and more pleasant.
Thank you. There are some other questions popping out right now, and so I will just tell them, thank you for this fascinating presentation. You have a profound knowledge of existing national guidance systems. Are there any example of good practices, I think, within these national guidance systems?
Yes, thank you again. When you see a person like me talking here and there, you think that this is easy. This is not easy. So I really appreciate the fact that you give me feedback, both positive and ways I can improve. In the work that I have been doing, particularly thanks to the ELGPN, I must say that the ELGPN, which was funded by the European Commission, and my salutations to an incredible man who managed to keep us together, Raimo Vuorinen from Finland. Was just the right person at the right time. Many of you know him. We learned a great deal from each other, because that is precisely what European funding was for, that we go to places which we of course enjoyed. It's part of our education as well. That we actually saw some of the best practices being showcased. Now, when we use the term best practices, is a bit dangerous, because what can be best in Malta might not work in Cyprus, even though it's a Mediterranean country. It might not work in, I don't know, Croatia or Serbia. So let's say for us, it seems to be something that we are proud of and we showcase. So I do encourage you to look at the ELGPN website, where there's an enormous amount of materials that we can use in order to get inspiration as to what one can do. And these examples of, I call them interesting practices, can trigger us to do like the goldfish that jumps out of the bowl, out of the aquarium, and to realize that there are other ways of doing things. Otherwise, we keep going, around in circles in our little bowl. It's very important to go out. And these illustrations of good practice or interesting practice are extremely helpful. And there's loads of them. Frankly, there are so many innovative and creative people out there, from the smallest countries to the largest ones. I mean, it's amazing what there is out there. Of course, this is not the place to go through that, but we're going to hear a few of these, I think, in the afternoon today, after Tamás speaks in the break. And also, those of you who are interested, please do write to me. I think I have this enormous privilege, but it's also a huge responsibility that, having been part of these international studies, my laptop has tons of material, which I would love to share with you, but I'm not going to send you everything, because it will drown, you'll drown in it. But if you write to me and say, I really need good practices on this, I'll find and send you. So please use me as a resource. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And maybe one last question that is, it get some upvotes, so I will I would like you to address it. Just try to fit it into 1 minute because we are over our time, but it's just an interesting question to ask. The question is, what I'm thinking that will be what are you thinking that will be the next period after pandemic times? You mentioned that context matter, and that in early 20s there was not early 20s, but in the past 2000, the power were given to populists. What is the next kind of context that we are entering right now? And is voice of client, as let's say, even ideology, is it here to stay with us for the years to come?
What a wonderful question. How I wish I could answer that. I am thinking a lot about that. Some of the intellectuals that I read who have, you know, a great understanding of the times we're going through, are a bit skeptical sometimes that we're all watching to see what happens in November in the States. We all have eyes on so many other countries in Europe where, you know, populism is on the rise. Well, we'll see. We have to see, I guess. We are what a very famous Italian philosopher called Antonio Gramsci called the interregnum. It's a very dangerous time. The interregnum is a time in historical development, in historical periods where, for example, between the Romans and the barbarians, there is a time, the interregnum, the in-between time, where the old system starts melting into thin air. For example, the notion of state, which was created 200 years ago, and the notion of the welfare state, okay? That systems that developed over time are melting, but nothing is replacing them. So we have a period of anarchy. It's a very dangerous period where you can see all sorts of movements, including neo-fascist movements, incredibly, as if we haven't learned from that. You know, people becoming more introspective, more tribal in their approach when we have problems which are global and which require a global answer. So we are passing through this interregnum. We do not know what kind of shapes society will cohere, will form. I am hopeful that we will find a way of coming together as a society, as a global society, in ways particularly that respond to one of the major challenges, that perhaps the major challenge, which is the ecological crisis. And what I'm seeing, and there are books about this, those of you who are interested could read the work of Eric Olin Wright, for example, but there is the famous Portuguese social scientist Boaventura de Sousa Santos, but many others who are writing about new forms of solidarity and of being together, often in ecologically sound ways that are sprouting here and there. And the argument is that, as with capitalism that took over feudalism, capitalism, an improvement by all means on feudalism, started in pockets here and there in societies, in European societies in the main, until it became widespread and over a period of hundreds of years became hegemonic, became the main way of organizing ourselves. Perhaps we're going through this lengthy period of time, if we have a length of time before, you know, the ecological crisis brings us to the precipice. We are seeing a lot of experiments internationally of people living differently, that there are other ways of being human in the world. And we, as citizens first, but also as carers, advisors who have, you know, the privilege of intervening in the lives of others, we are also part of the search for a more just and a more sane way of being in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation, your answers. It was really, really insightful. I hope our participants also share this feeling with me, and I wish you best of luck, and hopefully we will get to hear or even meet you soon after the pandemic is over and this is possible. So thank you again.